welcome, gentlemen. As usual, we have the core group, and everybody's in attendance except our star musician, Lee Shapiro, a former Four Seasons. So we've got Mike Derrico, we've got Dominic Paradise, we've got Anthony Colatrella, all from New Jersey and in New Jersey. And we've got Chuck Walker, who's handling the West Coast scene for us. Up in Portland, is it, Chuck?
I'm in Reno right now. Back in those days, I was in Portland, Oregon.
Yeah.
The Northwest scene, I would listen to the Portland stations, which were primarily KISN. I'd listen to Wolfman Jack out of Tijuana, and I'd listen to Seafun up in Vancouver, which had very different playlists.
On the East Coast, then, Anthony, what were the main stations that were pushing the Four Seasons music?
Oh, well, WABC, WMCA. That's what in New York City. That's what I listened to.
Well,
the major stations.
Yeah.
Well, there was also WINS, WINS, with Murray the K. So there was actually 3 stations.
Yeah, we had Cousin Brucey on WCBS FM. Now he's back on his original station, 770 AM.
Yeah, you're talking a later time, going back, originally when the Four Seasons first started. It was WABC. Cousin Brucey was there. WMCA with the good guys, and WINS with Murray the K. There are 3 major stations.
He's back on 770 again, on his original station.
We also have Joey Reynolds, and as a Brit, I know nothing about Joey Reynolds except for the theme song. So
yeah, he was up in a Connecticut area. I never heard him. But of course, yeah, well, that's where he started. Then he went to Connecticut, and then he actually became very close with Bob Crew and then the Four Seasons, and he actually sort of emceed a lot of their concerts early on, and that's why they gave him his theme song, which was, taken from Big Girls Don't Cry.
Yeah. Well, yes. Well, obviously, we'll come to some stage where we'll pick up on the radio stations in the discussions. But the last time we spoke, we were covering the period up to Nicky leaving, and then really focusing this time on the post-departure period, because Nicky left, Charlie Calello left, Sandy and Denny left, and you would have expected that the whole group would have fallen apart in terms of production, but and because Bob Crew was greatly interested in other artists and his own record companies. But Bob, we said last time, Bob Gaudio picked up with I've Got You Under My Skin, and they had 4 top 100 hits or top 50 hits in 1966. But I'd mistakenly believed that at that time, Phillips and Crew and the group saw the Beatles as competition and the Beach Boys as competition, because Brian Wilson and the Beatles were competition, and that was well known at the time. It was understood in the UK. But the recent interviews have displayed that the Four Seasons perhaps didn't care about trends. They seem to not see that concept as part of their role in music making. Just finding or writing or finding writers and then finding a song that they liked and they thought would be a hit was all that seemed to matter to them. They weren't into the album concept, and now they were Phillips. And Mike Derrico, you picked up on this with regard to Phillips before, and it's totally evident in 1966 that there were no albums, no original albums from a group that really needed to compete. What do you think, Mike?
Oh, I absolutely agree. Phillips drops the ball around 1966, where the rest of pop music, rock music is evolving into album format, album is art, that type of thing. And Phillips is still marketing the group like it's 1966. Hence all of these new gold hits.
Yeah.
Still taking that model of Dawn and other hits and that sort of thing. So they were just They were clueless.
Yeah, they were. They weren't on the same planet as the other record labels and the other major artists who invested in that, because obviously the Beatles stopped touring and devoted themselves totally to album production and experimentation. The Beach Boys did because Brian Wilson tackled it with his attempt at the Smile album. But Phillips were riding the curve of the music that came over from VJ when they went bust and putting out gold albums, gold vault albums. But then we see that pop music was changing dramatically by early 1967. We talked about Valli's solo career, and that seemed to be a genre that Phillips seemed to think they could invest in rather than in the group sound. What do you think, Anthony?
I thought just the opposite, actually. I didn't think they wanted to invest in Frankie as a solo artist. They seemed to, they didn't promote Sun Ain't Gonna Shine anymore at all. They relegated it to a minor label and then didn't publicize it, sort of didn't even seemingly want to release it. They did with the second one. They at least released the
You're Gonna Hurt Yourself.
Yeah, You're Gonna Hurt Yourself. So it was a minor hit, but then they sort of went back and didn't do anything with You're Ready Now or The Proud One. Those songs seemingly came out of left field. There was no promotion. You didn't really hear anything about them. There was really nothing that seemed that they seemed to want to publicize or promote with them.
Well, it was Valli's objective to be a solo artist, and obviously Crew went with this, and so did Guardia. Well, he says that they wanted to tap into Frankie Valli's versatility, and they had the 300 tracks with the Wonder Who, Valli, and the Seasons in '65. But they never seemed to. They seemed to have a scattergun approach rather than a focused approach. Yeah. They still wanted to be successful, but they obviously invested in '67 to record a hit song, and they had a hit song in Can't Take My Eyes Off You. Yeah. So all the investment seems to have gone into Valli at that point in time, and Phillips wanted to cash in on the group still. Of
course, if you believe Jersey Boys, it was very begrudgingly that they released the record, right? And it seemed like it was left to Guardio and Crew to sort of do the promotion and the publicity, not the record label. If you truly believe that.
Well, he said that in the interview that he personally invested promotion into launching Take My Eyes Off You, which was a surprise to me when I heard it only a couple of days ago. So '67, by this time we'd had Rubber Soul and we'd had Revolver, which had substantially changed pop music in terms of creativity, but the Seasons were still, pushing Valli into the solo artist period.
I would think that there had to be some internal conflict, because I think it was evident that Frankie did sort of want a solo career, or thought of himself more as a pop singer than a rock and roll singer, and that Guardio sort of felt obliged to try to write something for him, but at the same time he was trying to move the Four Seasons ahead, sort of evolve into somewhat of a newer sound than they did, formerly with VJ and the early Phillips. So I think he was sort of maybe pulled in two different directions, and that may be why things as a whole suffered a bit, or at least did not move forward as quickly as they should have.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of ballads, albums with not rock and roll, but more softer love songs and stuff like that, focusing on his natural singing voice.
Yeah,
I think Anthony pretty much nailed it right here with at least with respect to Guardio, because I think none of this is lost on Guardio. in terms of the evolution of pop music. Again, what Phillips is doing, but Gaudio seems to be, he's torn between fulfilling his needs as an artist, as an evolving artist, and having to write for Frankie's voice.
Yeah.
You know?
But they were a touring group then.
Yeah, and I think that's an important part of it.
Yeah.
Because their touring group, from my perspective out on the West Coast, they rarely came out here. They were doing, I guess, club dates in the East Coast, and the big arena shows had not evolved yet until after the Beatles and Stones showed they were successful. But a lot of the songs in the Valli era, which I consider the 66, 70 with the ballads that Dominic is talking about, were songs I would consider focused as a club act rather than to sell in the marketplace to teeny boppers as a 45. Yeah. And that was one direction. And they were competing with a lot of different sounds coming from different parts of the country. The West Coast had gone on fire with the songs coming out of the San Francisco and Los Angeles markets. Not the surf music, it was passé at that point in time, but a lot was coming out of San Francisco with Jefferson Airplane and Janis Joplin and Big Brother and the Holding Company, that type of music. And it was starting to move east, and the radio stations were starting to play it. And it wasn't the same sound that Frankie was trying to sing. Gaudio was going partially that way with the Genuine Imitation Life. Crew was going a total different direction. He realized that he was picking up these groups who could sing that kind of music, and he could do the 45s for $1,000 a shot and make 500 copies and send them out and hope one of them would hit. And well, there were three total different directions.
Well, there's a couple of things about what you say, Charles. One is that you needed a Boeing 707 to fly you across the country to get to where you are. And you can't underestimate the size of the US and the amount of traveling that groups had to do to, perform everywhere in the country. Mm. That's one thing that I've picked up on and noted in terms of Nick Massey leaving. The other thing is that whilst though that sound was developing, obviously it was influenced by the Beatles, and that sort of fertilized a lot of growth in music markets. But it seemed that, and it is mentioned in the interview that Joe Long commented on it, there was country, there was R&B, there was Motown, there was soul, there were all these different genres, and there were ballads. And with Dominic saying there were a lot of ballads about, Phillips decided that Frankie could be a pop stroke middle of the road artist by 1967, and they invested in they pulled things together for the solo album, just like they pulled together for New Gold Hits, the Four Seasons stuff. Both had had huge credits to them because there's a diversity in there that comes from time. The fact that you've got Valli's solo tracks from 65 and 66 thrown in with the stuff he did with Archie Schrock in 67. So Solo is quite a good album. And then they invested in a few sessions with the Four Seasons, with Goodbye Girl and other songs, plus the songs left over from Working My Way Back to You session, and the stuff that they recorded in 66. So we had quite a diverse pair of albums in mid-67. But then in June, Sgt. Pepper comes out.
Everybody away.
It blew everybody away. And some say, there's nothing, it's still influencing music today. I've listened to it recently, and there are some absolutely amazing tracks that can't be repeated by any group anywhere. But that was the Beatles. They were at a creative peak and wanted to deliver their creativity. When you listen to those Four Seasons interviews that we put out last week, they weren't thinking that way.
But also the Beatles, you had three writers working together, and opposed to Frankie relying on on Guardio and Crew and whoever else. You know, these guys were playing, collaborating, playing music, writing together, singing together. So it's,
Well, if you look,
against one.
Dominic, if you look at the history of groups, the groups with multiple vocalists, lead vocalists, fared better throughout the decades. You know, if you take the Temptations, for instance, even though they lost David Ruffin, you know, they were able to replace people with quality vocalists. They always had a counterpoint, whereas the Four Seasons only had one instrument vocally, and that was Frankie Valli. It wasn't until 75 when they had Jerry and they had Don and they had Frankie that everything changed. And we'll see that evolution, I think, as we examine what happened to them through that period. But
and they were hot. They were hot on something. That, you know, that was quite a group. You know.
Yeah. Well,
Those Four Seasons were quite a group. Yeah.
Yeah. That's why they deserve the title, the New Four Seasons, because basically that's what they are.
Yeah.
So 67, going into 68, the concept of a concept album seems to have appeared to Phillips and Bob Gaudio. Doesn't look as though Bob Crew was involved at all in that, because he had the new generation album, he had the Barbarella film, he had all of his group of companies, and well, from what I understand, he was heavily influenced, or starting to be heavily influenced, by drugs and alcohol, and wasn't always working at his best. But, you know, Genuine Imitation Life Gazette was a gem of an idea from the Greenwich Village Underground with Jake Holmes. What did you guys think of how that came about, and what was the reaction to Saturday's Father? Anthony, you were listening to that.
Yeah, well, let's see. I thought actually the change began. Good thing Lee's not here. I think their sound changed with Watch the Flowers Grow, which I think was a very weak attempt to appease or to appeal to these, you know, peace, love, flower power audience. I think it was a weak attempt, but the sound, that was definitely not a traditional Four Seasons sound. But then following that, they went back to basics, you know, with their cover version of Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow, which I thought was a great cover version. But then I think, when Saturday's Father followed that. Now, in between, I had read about Bob Gaudio starting this project of a concept album similar to Sgt. Pepper's, and that he would work with Jake Holmes, which surprised me because I do recall Jake Holmes. There used to be a show from New York, Live at the Bitter End, and he actually appeared on that a few times. So I was familiar with him, but he was a folk singer. And I even remember him singing Genuine Imitation Life on that song. But I said, gee, you know, he's not working with Crew, he's working with a folk singer. You know, what is this album going to be like? But then really, I didn't hear anything at all about it. And when Saturday's Father came out, that was not introduced as a song from the album. It was just, you know, put forth as a single, and it really didn't catch on. It's kind of disappeared rather quickly. And then came, I think, Electric Stories. And what was that? I don't what kind of a song was Electric Stories? Was that a preview of the album? You were sort of left to your own devices as to what this album was going to be. And then again, there was really, I don't recall any promotion or publicity about the album.
No, well, the album didn't come out till January 69.
69, yeah.
So 68, they tried to, and there's an interesting comment by Bob Gaudio in this interview, when they brought out I Make a Fool of Myself as a follow-up single to Can't Take My Eyes Off You.
Yeah, I didn't understand his comment.
That was a mistake. I didn't like it.
Yeah, I thought that was...
You know, it was, he sort of went along with, you know, Crew and Valli.
Well, remember, I know Lee, was it Lee? Yeah, Lee used to say, oh, well, Bob, I don't know if he said Crew or Gaudio now, but he would say, well, if you had a success with one, do it again. Well, I didn't think I Make a Fool of Myself I mean, it was obviously the same style as Can't Take My Eyes Off You, but it wasn't, an exact replica. It wasn't exactly the same. I thought it was a very, very good record. So I really didn't know why he said that. Gaudio said a lot of things that I didn't quite understand in those interviews.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
he didn't remember. He
didn't
didn't. Yeah, Dad, I'm sorry.
at once. He didn't think much of the Beatles early on, and then
Right.
the later stuff he thinks, nobody can change except the Beatles.
Yeah. Only the Beatles could
Only the
change.
Beatles are allowed to grow up, he said.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well, maybe Can't
I-
Take My Eyes Off You was the answer to Frank Sinatra, that was his.
I
Frank
think you're probably
Sinatra.
right, Dominic. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was.
Yeah.
And once that had been a hit, of course they did To Give as well, didn't they? Which
Yeah.
a real attempt to
Beautiful song.
a
Beautiful.
serious pop balladeer.
Right.
But I never heard it at the time. It never did anything in the UK. It was one of those tracks you dug out 10 years later to me.
What's To Give, you mean?
Yeah. And
Huh. No,
Yeah,
that did
nothing on
pretty
the
well
West
in the
Coast
United
either.
States.
no, and
Well, yeah, I saw it appeared on one of those lists that you gave us. I was kind of surprised that it was as high up as it was on those California lists.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, but remember those lists that I sent out were snapshots in time, and what I went through
Yeah.
is I went through a whole bunch of them, and I picked out where it was the highest point.
Right.
And
Well, I was
a couple
kind
of
of
them
surprised.
a couple of them, like To Give, were on the charts for 3 weeks, and that was it. Then it was gone.
Yeah, well, I was even surprised that it appeared on a California, and it was like the number 20s.
No,
I
that
didn't
wasn't-
think it was
that
that bad.
Now, that wasn't the California list; it was the Northwest list.
Oh, well, Northwest. So still,
But
even
I don't
even
know.
better.
I don't know exactly how those lists were put together back then. I know they weren't based on record sales. I think
Ah.
they were based upon call-ins and the
Oh.
attitude of the DJs at the time.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I think TV promotion might have had a part to play. Because obviously we've got TV videos of To Give and Can't Take My Eyes Off You done from TV shows in America, whereas obviously by this stage, the full seasons had sort of after Electric Stories disappeared from the UK scene altogether,
Mhm.
and they just didn't seem to exist. Obviously, you reach an age where you're growing up, you're having a family, you only dip into the radio station locally, and that was obviously Radio 1, Radio 2, and the pirate stations off the coast, because we didn't have commercial radio in the UK. So you had to search for music if you wanted to find what was a current bag. In America, you had masses of stations. So seeing what Charles found in Portland is quite amazing to me. But there'd be a completely amazing set of charts for the New York area, and maybe the Boston area, and maybe the Philadelphia.
I didn't recognize half of the songs or the artists on those Northwest charts.
No,
They
you
were-
probably never heard them.
Yeah, I never did. I never heard of half of
You
the
had totally
artists.
different music back there. And that's
Yeah.
why I think I frustrate you guys sometimes, is because my memories at that time are a totally different culture of different
Well,
types and styles of music.
You're in a different country to your colleagues.
Oh yeah, totally.
That is the amazing thing about America that comes out of the fact that we've got you in this group, Charles, and your perspective coupled with, well, I think the New Jersey guys and the UK guys, we probably shared music between two countries, maybe a lot more. But obviously by '68, the UK group scene had disappeared from America, according to some people, and it was the US genres that were focused on. Particularly, country seemed to be particularly strong.
It was picking up.
Yeah. So, so when did anybody hear Genuine Imitation Live Gazette when it came out?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
you had that advance, but I waited and waited. When was it coming out? And I used to always go to the record stores and spend time looking at the shelves and picking up records. And finally, one day I went to the record store and I see this album, Genuine Imitation Life Gazette. kind of surprised. Oh, it's finally here. Brought it home and played it. So, you're
What would
you
you
look. Well, you look at the list of songs, and the first song is "American Crucifixion and Resurrection." Well, that's not Sherry. That's not Dawn. and then you play it, and there's this, I don't know what you'd say, grandiose symphonic intro that sort of then merges into this driving rhythmic beat, and
It seemed that some of the Beatles' dramatic symphonic arrangements they did with George Martin, because I've been reading The Summer of Love and the Making of Sergeant Pepper, which is an amazing book, which doesn't just talk about the making of that album and all the experimentation that went into it, but it talks about the evolution of the group in terms of creativity. Now, Jenny Imitation Life Gazette seems like it tried to borrow bits from Sergeant Pepper.
Sergeant Pepper, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, the symphonic arrangements, and obviously on Jenny Imitation Life Gazette, you've got this
the ending
from Hey
right
Jude.
from Hey Jude, yeah.
Which,
I
mean,
I thought that was maybe a bit of a maybe even a little bit of a slap in the face, because I mean the song itself is about sort of about insincerity and and then they even had a little cartoon in the newspaper about the Beatles worshiping the Maharaji with their fingers behind their back, crossed behind their back. I thought it was maybe a little bit of a slap at the Beatles, and then
unnecessary and cynical. Response, but the whole
album was almost a spoof, wasn't it?
Yeah, well,
I mean, I consider
no, parts of it were spoof. I mean, some of the songs were spoof, but certainly not. That newspaper part, yeah, a lot of the
cover art.
Yeah, that was spoof. But I wouldn't say the songs, per se were spoof.
Mrs. Stately's Garden.
Love it. Yeah. She wasn't growing tomatoes and basil, that's for sure.
No, that was it.
Yeah, well,
Frankie tries to deliver Soul of a Woman and does it beautifully because vocally, he could deliver stuff. But tracking the life of a woman from
birth to death.
Yeah, I thought was I didn't hear it till 75, obviously, but it didn't seem a Frankie song. But it was very interesting that in the interviews this week that we put out, Bob Gaudio said it was the best thing they've ever done, whereas Frankie says he was never happy with it.
He was uncomfortable. Yeah, he didn't like telling people how they should think or something, singing songs that tell people what they should think. Yeah.
But I think what came through in those interviews, and we'll come on to this again and again, I think, is Frankie's attitude towards performing, which is the primary purpose of his life, not only through that period, but right up to today. And seeing him a month ago in Liverpool was, it was a joyous concert. And although he's 88 and he has to manage to get on stage and do the performance, it was a great tribute to his commitment and the love for the fans and the people that he gives them. So I think that's going to be a theme that we're going to pick up on, but he drifts away from it at times, which we'll talk about in future sessions. But at this point in time, when the album was released, it didn't seem to hit the underground market or any of the folk people, and it didn't hit Four Seasons fans, and it didn't hit any other buyers in the market.
Something's on my mind was very foxtrotty.
Yeah.
And then you get hit with Idaho, and what the heck was that all about?
Yeah.
Well, I thought, I think you might consider that song a spoof. And I don't know, all this is open to everyone interprets songs differently. I thought that was sort of a spoof of maybe a Beach Boys song where they were sort of exaggerating the harmonies. and it was sort of a parody of like going back to the good old days, you know, nostalgia.
Back in those days, it was really West, way West,
Yeah,
Old West.
right. Well, the choice of songs and obviously the way the album came out didn't really work. And to talk to Charlie Colello about that, he supported the album because obviously he appears on it and helps with the arrangements. But
did he really arrange that? Because I mean, it's not like his arrangements at all.
He worked on the arrangements a little bit because
Yeah.
obviously you can write parts that needed to be written for different instruments.
Yeah. Yes.
So I think he contributed, but he did play piano on it. I think he's credited on the album itself. I might be wrong, but I seem to remember he played piano on it. But obviously he'd come back, but at the same time as they were working on Jenny Imitation Live cassette, they're working on the Timeless album. Now, the Timeless album seems to be a straight attempt to get Frankie into Frank Sinatra
yes.
type of role. What do you think, Dominic? You know the Timeless album.
Oh yeah. I'm just trying to collect my thoughts over here. Again, ballads. I don't know how you go from Gazette to something like Timeless. It seems like they were just all over the place.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
I don't know what they were searching for.
No, and yeah, I think they lost a huge number of fans as a result of what happened in 67 and 68. There were just no reminders that the Four Seasons sound was still alive. That there was didn't happen in the UK. I don't think it happened in America.
Very confusing. Yeah.
I did hear Electric Stories and thought it was great on the radio in the UK, but I heard it maybe twice, and it didn't get any sort of promotion. But then nobody understood the lyrics, but it didn't seem to matter at that time because.
And that's a Sandy Linzer song too. Yeah. The master of lyrics.
Yeah.
Well, if you really pay attention to it, play it many times and start listening to the lyrics, I guess maybe they're somewhat clever lyrics, but in the context of this, in the context of the song, it was really hard to sort it out.
By the time I get to Phoenix, Sunny, where are they going?
Well, the Timeless album was definitely, a deliberate attempt to further Frankie's solo career, and it followed that Frankie Valli solo album. I think it just built upon that, and chronologically, that was 67. I mean, they didn't start really working on the Genuine Imitation Life Gazette until later in 68. So that Timeless album preceded that by more than a year, I think. So I don't know that there's any connection between the two.
Well, the one thing about Timeless is Bob Crewe was involved, obviously.
Yes, yeah, right.
And obviously, and it just struck me when I was listening to You Only Live Twice and some of Barbarella material that Crewe was involved with. Just how orchestral he got with the next generation. Was it Next Generation?
No, it was Glass Menagerie or something.
Oh yeah. The Glitter House.
Some Glitter House, yeah.
But he obviously he got into this orchestra bag that he got into stemming from Can't Take My Eyes Off You, and we've seen the photographs of him conducting strings and orchestra in the studio.
Well, he picked up on the girls' music to watch girls by. And he had a big hit with that as an instrumental, so it changed the direction he was thinking, and he was focusing more on that at the time, and he carried that on into Barbarella and some of the follow-up singles. Well, You Only Live Twice, and a lot of the stuff he was doing at the time, which was in reality competing with whatever the Seasons were doing.
Well, it fitted with Timeless as well, because I didn't realize till I was doing the research, and I found a well, there was a tape box which should have had 4 unreleased songs in it from 1968, and one was called I Was a Boy, and the other one was called Alone Again. And I think Alone Again was written by Artie Schruck, and I think these were arrangements by Artie Schruck. And the box clearly says these tracks are there, and so too is the Fortunes song.
You Got Your Troubles?
You've Got Your Troubles, yeah.
Yeah.
And an original copy of A Face Without a Name was recorded at the same time. And this was right in the middle of, the Timeless, or as they were doing the Timeless tracks.
Mm-hmm.
But, what we found when we got that tape transferred, it was a distorted tape. There were 2 tracks, but one was had all crackle and hiss on it, and the other one was perfect. So I extracted all of the perfect single track and converted it into 2-track mono, and it's perfect. And there are 8 tracks from the Timeless album, but all in mono, because the album was never released in mono. But as a result of this this mono tape, which was 2-track mono but with 1 track distorted, the result is we got the tracks that we got off it in mono. And what clicked about this time is that according to Artie Schrock, because of the union rules, you had to perform the song live in the studio to record it. So there was always a rehearsal track done. And a lot of these tracks that I had found were the actual recorded rehearsal tracks. So the most outstanding one is, I think it's Watch the Music Play.
Neil Sedaka. Is that Neil Sedaka?
Back and Watch the Music Play. That was brilliant because it has Bob Crew counting them in. And at the very end, it's an extended run out, and they all fall apart and stop playing. And then and they all start laughing. And Bob Crew goes to the microphone and says, "Thank you, gentlemen. That was lovely." That just summed up his ability to be able to produce, but also the fact that they did these tracks live with the orchestra there, and Frankie sang it perfect. It's a perfect take, and it could have been used, but as Artie said, they were forced to do tracks again.
Did they do that with "Can't Take My Eyes Off You" also?
Yes, they did.
That with a live
the version
orchestra?
that we've got, the alternative version that we've got, is the actual live version that there was a run through with the orchestra. So we've actually got the live version in the studio. But then, as Artie says, they recorded the orchestra, obviously, and then Frankie did another take of the vocal, and that's the one that went out.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting to see around the technique of recording at this time. I mean, it wasn't like what the Beatles were doing with loops of tape and all sorts of playback, but they were into trying to produce ballads and ballad album. At the same time, they were doing Journey Imitation Live cassette. I don't think.
Ken, was this recording technology or technique where they had to record because of union rules with a live orchestra? Was that restricted basically to New York? Because I know the West Coast groups did not do that.
I think it might have been restricted to.
I mean, the West Coast groups were always they would do the instrumental tracks, and then when the instrumental tracks were finished, then they would dub over the vocals to them, and that's why you've got some screwed up mixes.
Well, that's the way the Beatles were recording with 2 4-track machines and syncing them. But by the time they'd got to, I don't know whether they recorded Timeless at Mirror Sound or not. They did do tracks from solo at Mirror Sound with George Shearer, and I've interviewed him about what they did. But they did use the Bob Crew technique of doing the instrumental first and then overdubbing the group.
Oh.
But I've got a feeling that some of the early and certainly the 66 recordings that we've salvaged, because I've got 4 copies of Raven, and they're 4 separate takes. And on the box, it says guitar too loud. which indicates that it was a live take. So they did it again, and so they varied the instrument mix as they were recording, and the vocal slightly different. So and they did the same with "I'm Gonna Change." There are alternative instrumental takes of that, and there's the alternative vocal take of "I'm Gonna Change," and "Tell It to the Rain." And you've got to remember that the singles that were on New Gold Hits are not the same as the album tracks. They're different takes. So
Different.
Yes.
the techniques were different.
To the ring.
But to find the mono tape of Genuine Imitation Live cassette seemed to excite the people at Snapper quite a lot, that would be the sort of key piece of this box set. What's your thoughts on that? Do you think that warranted being a featured album for its collectability?
Yes. Yeah. For its collectability, sure.
Well, it's only selling for $2.99 or $5 on eBay and around. So it's not as if there aren't copies of it. They're okay. They're maybe not in perfect condition, but
Ken, there's really three different markets for the box set. There's the old timers like you and I that remember the seasons back to the 60s.
Yeah.
There's the group that picked them up in the 70s with Who Loves You and December '63. And there's the young
Jersey
folk
Boys.
and then there's
got
Dominic
involved with Jersey Boys. Those are three distinct groups, and they all have a different perspective. So it's difficult to come up with is that really the key of the set? The key of the set will be whatever the focal point was of the people who remember that era.
Collectors.
I was gonna. Do you read critiques of the Genuine Imitation Life Gazette now, though? I mean, maybe I'm reading just a slanted a view, but I mean, they talk about this album in glowing terms now. Most of these critiques that a lost masterpiece. A real gem of an album that was ignored for all these years. Look how great it is. So I don't
Sounds like Pet Sounds with the Beach
Yeah.
Boys.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. I mean, the critiques are really amazing now. People really think this is a great album.
I think these are
Well,
the
the people at the time were focused on what they'd been hearing for the last several years, and when you took them outside their box, they couldn't deal with it. I mean, it took me a while to really to really comprehend what was there with Genuine Imitation Life, just like it took me a while with Pet Sounds. I mean, they were just so different than what I'd been used to hearing at the time that you got to get used to them. Your mind sets in one direction, and when it sees something new, it has to do a take and say, how do I relate that to what I think?
Well, I've read several really critical reviews, and I sent you a couple in the notes I sent over, which you didn't see. Saw their attempt at innovation, but didn't see it as successful, and didn't think it was something the Four Seasons should have attempted. Now, Bob Gaudio talks about, he never wants to go back. He never wants to do Sherry again. And this is where Lee comes in. And, Bob Gaudio insists on he always had to progress and he always had to change. But Lee says, well, you can do change incrementally, and you can progressively move the sound on. And Phillips and Mike and I talking about New Gold Hits, you can see the change that was coming on New Gold Hits, can't you, Mike? And really, that was a change that could have been progressively developed. You just needed the writers.
It really could have. Really quick, I want to speak to what Anthony just said about the current generation. About 5 years ago, I was a guest on a podcast called the Great Albums Podcast, and the consensus there was that this was a lost masterpiece, Genuine Imitation Life Gazette. These guys were probably in their 20s, So it's the current generation's in her 20s now discovering this record. And that was the approach. Now, I came in having heard this record my whole life. And these guys had just basically heard it for the first time preparing for this show. And they got me because they knew, I was the Four Seasons guy and I had interviewed Joe Long and all that. And so that it was an interesting conversation. But these guys were like, wow, why didn't we know about this? Regarding New Gold Hits, yeah, it was something that could have been explored a little further. From there, what did they do? Electric Stories and Watch the Flowers Grow.
Yeah.
Essentially making drug-influenced music without the drugs.
Yeah.
Mike, I'm curious as well, because I think sometimes that hidden masterpiece thing, it comes through in terms of sounds that were explored there, which became much more common later. So, for example, whether I know I'm going to listen to Genuine Imitation. I remember listening to it years ago, but did it influence other styles of music that came much later, or does it remind people of elements of that from a much earlier era? Can be sometimes a powerful thing.
I think it kind of represents Bob Gaudio. To me, Bob Gaudio was like a sponge that just soaked up all of the best elements of pop music at the time. So when you're listening to Genuine Imitation Life, you're hearing Something's on Her Mind. You're hearing Burt Bacharach a little bit. I hear Burt Bacharach in that. Wall Street Village Day. You're hearing a little bit of. It reminds me of that Fifth Dimension song, Up and Away. A little bit. If you listen to, you hear all of these little elements of what's going on in pop music. 68, 60, everything up to that point. So I don't know how much it. It's an interesting thought, Mark, because you're on one hand you're saying, well, where are the influences? Where can you hear what grew out of Genuine Imitation Life? And on the other hand, you're hearing what kind of the seeds that were planted that grew into Genuine Imitation Life.
Yeah, but if you take something like Sgt. Pepper, the album was a creation of completely different pieces of work that are so diverse.
Right.
The audience they selected for, they poured over the running order because A Day in the Life couldn't be put in next to Lovely Rita Mita Maid. Now, and A Day in the Life, it is just such a magnificent piece of music in itself. They decided they had to finish the album. Bob Gaudio did the same thing with Soul of a Woman, in a way, trying to create that masterpiece to finish the album. But the lyric content that he got from Jake Holmes on that and a number of other songs doesn't seem to have in any way an uplifting or a connected style to which its audience could relate to.
There's nothing cohesive in it, in other words.
It's not cohesive. No.
Yeah.
It's not cohesive, but you don't have to be cohesive. You can be diverse. But with Sgt. Pepper, the diversity seems to work. And obviously, everybody says Pet Sounds works because of the way Brian Wilson arranged it.
If I may, let me give you another example I just thought of a group that was able to successfully transition their sound as a group and also as a lead singer. You guys in the East Coast probably remember Dick Clark's Where the Action Is?
Yeah.
The TV series.
I'm not going to say
people in
the Raiders.
People UK probably don't
Yes,
remember.
yes, Where the Action Is. I remember that. Yeah.
Paul Revere and the Raiders was signed to do as the house band for that show.
Yes, yes.
Paul Revere was a local band in Portland at the time, and their repertoire was strictly Northwest rock, the West Coast Richard Berry stuff and the stuff coming out of Seattle. When they moved to work on that show down in LA, they totally changed their style so that it would fit the TV series of the time and attract more of a younger crowd rather than the 20s drunk dancing crowd. And I think the fact that they were advertising that on TV as a link to their album changes was helpful in them making the successful change. And that helped sell the albums because people were exposed to music. Whereas if we take a look at Genuine Imitation Life, and most of the Four Seasons stuff at that period of time, the exposure, other than on the radio for 2.5 minutes, was very limited. They had nobody helping them out on the back, so to speak, to get the music out there.
That's Philips' investment. They expected Genuine Imitation Life Cassette to take off and be a major success. You know, a top 10 album. It didn't. It seemed it. You know, got to 38, I think it was in the chart. I said in my notes, but it wasn't a success.
And even that,
And I think then Philips, in our next session, I want us to talk about the Philips reaction to that, what we've heard in interview, what we can glean, took the group through from 1968 and the calamity that is the lack of success of a attempt to be creative that takes us on through into the 70s. So last words on Genuine Imitation Life Cassette before I wind us up for this particular session.
Well, of course, everyone, you know, compares it to Sgt. Pepper or Pet Sounds, which I guess is expected or obvious. But I think if you just listen to it as, you know, take it out of the context of the times and listen to it, each individual song, I still think those are very good songs musically and lyrically. Although I think, you know, lyrically, it's a little more startling because the Four Seasons were not a social commentary group, and the lyrics are, you know, obviously directed that way.
There was one mistake in the interviews, because the very first social commentary record wasn't Saturday's Father, it was Beggar's Parade.
Yes, that's true.
So they dipped into the social.
But Beggar's Parade was a protest against protesters, whereas Genuine Imitation Life, you know, some of the songs actually were protest songs.
Yeah.
Against what was going on. But I liked the album. I thought the songs were good. I just took it as, well, they were, you know, Gaudio was trying to be really different. He was trying to, you know, sort of do what the Beach Boys were doing with the Beatles. And I thought he did a pretty good job. I didn't think it had to be, you know, the, you know, greatest album of all time. That's the way I regard it.
It was what he wanted to do. He was comfortable with it.
That
was Bob Gaudio.
It is what he had to do, according to him. Yeah.
But he asked Frankie to sing lyrics that he was uncomfortable.
Yes, right. He was uncomfortable with the lyrics, but you know,
you have to leave it. I don't think Dominic, we're going to be asking you to do any songs from Genuine Imitation.
Yeah,
Life.
you don't do any of those songs, do you?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you could do Something's on Her Mind. That's an
upbeat song. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, guys, something that just came up from what Ken said about our next session about the Philips attitude. I'm going to go back and look at the discographies of Philips single releases in that period of time, and I'll send you some data on that. So I think one of the things that is important is what Philips was looking at as far as the other releases they were putting out and where they were having their successes versus their failures, and to see how these season songs fit in that total package. It'll give us a better perspective of what Philips A&R group people at the time were looking at to make money, because they weren't having success clearly with a lot of their groups.
Well, they hedged their bets, Charles, because the very same time as they released Genuine Imitation Life Cassette, they released Edizione d'Oro.
Yes, yeah, that was kind of strange.
So next time we'll talk about the Philips situation, the loss of confidence they had in the group in terms of original work, and the work that crew did with Edizione d'Oro, and the experimentation that was going on in the studio that we've discovered running through this period up until they had another hit. And they had another hit, top 10 hit in the UK, 1969.
You know what would have been interesting, Ken, really quick, is a few times, I talked about this with Joe a few times. said to me that, and I don't know if this is probably common knowledge at this point, that one of the ideas at the time was to play Genuine Imitation Life in its entirety.
Yeah.
In their show,
Yeah.
and then have an intermission and then come back with the hits. I think, with the exception of maybe the Who playing Tommy, that would have been a first for a pop group.
It would have been.
It really, because it's a trend now with everybody playing their albums in their entirety. But that's an interesting thought.
Yeah.
That if they would have done that.
With a lot of groups, particularly rock groups, as you say, but you're the expert on the people who have done that.
What is this hit in '69? Was that your Four Seasons or Frankie Valli had a hit in '69 in the UK?
Frankie Valli had a hit with you.
Yeah, Frankie Valli, not the Four Seasons.
Well, yeah. But I mean,
Yeah.
I don't. Well, of course, we got to remember by this time, when was the first time Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons became an entity, as opposed to Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons being separate? You know the
It
first.
was a re-release, wasn't it? Was it a re-release of Hurt Yourself?
I'll tell you why it was a re-release and exactly where it grew into a monster hit in the UK. Next time.
Ready? Yeah.
Can I just say, I think one of the things, the standout things for me tonight is I think some of the things that Chuck's been talking about to do with how music different parts of the US had very different musical cultures at the time and availability of things, different playlists, and how in today, versus today, where the structures are really different now.
Yeah.
And actually, maybe is something really important about how music resonates locally in different cultures and how important maybe that is to people, and sometimes how they feel uncomfortable when there's all this noise of media noise that's coming from cultures they don't relate to in the same way, and there's something in that maybe is important for us.
That's the one thing, Mark, about the box set is I tried to capture, well, because it was an album box set, I tried to make sure each of the albums captured with the collector's notes and with the book that's there is that this Jersey Boys isn't the way the Four Seasons story was. What we're doing in these podcasts and what we've tried to do in the box set is try to capture what each album tried to do, where it was targeted, how it succeeded or not, and that's what I'm going to carry through with the rest of these podcasts as we go back into the 70s. But
tells a story through music, and that through
tells the story of their music and not this massive jump from Nicky leaving to Who Loves You in December '63. People write about our podcasts and say, I didn't know this, or I didn't have that perspective on things. So thank you, gentlemen, for all you've contributed tonight. I hope you've enjoyed it as I have, and we must do this again sometime.
Yes. Thank you.
It's always fun.
Good to see you guys.
Good to see you.
Peace.
Take care, guys.
Peace and love.
Peace and love.
That's the answer.
Keep on rocking.
See you, everybody.
Bye, Dominic.
Bye, guys.